In 1920, a group of men met in a car dealership in Canton, Ohio to create what would become the NFL. But the real birth of professional football didn't happen in that showroom. It happened 4 years earlier in the harsh desert of Mexico during a disastrous military failure that exposed a strange and unexpected weakness in the American soldier, a weakness that had nothing to do with combat. This is the story of how the U.S. Army's frantic attempt to solve a moral crisis of boredom and vice accidentally created the most popular sport in America. It all starts at 4 a.m. on March 9th, 1916, when the town of Columbus, New Mexico was awakened by gunfire. Pancho Villa and his revolutionary forces had attacked the town and the adjoining U.S. Army post Camp Furlong. They burned buildings, stole horses, and seized weapons. While the raid lasted only hours, it left 18 Americans dead and a nation demanding action. President Woodrow Wilson's response was swift. He ordered General John J. Blackjack Pershing to lead an expedition into Mexico to capture Villa. What began with 6,000 troops soon ballooned to a mobilization of over 110,000 men. For months, the U.S. Army troops penetrated deep into the punishing Chihuahua Desert, while the National Guard troops patrolled the border. The expedition was a spectacular failure. Supply lines collapsed, trucks broke down, and Villa was never captured. The real disaster wasn't the failure to find one man, it was what the mission revealed about the entire U.S. Army. The punitive expedition served as a critical stress test before America's potential entry into World War I, and the results were catastrophic. The War Department discovered its army was unprepared for modern war in two fundamental ways. First, it lacked physical and logistical readiness. When the Army examined its mobilized force, the results were a national embarrassment. Reports from the time were shocking. Nearly half of the men drafted were found to be physically defective. These weren't men wounded in battle. This was how they showed up. The most common issues were mechanical: weak bones, bad joints, and poor posture. The average American soldier, it turned out, wasn't even fit for a long march, let alone the trenches of Europe. Fixing the soldiers' bodies was the easy part. The Army discovered a second, far more insidious problem that couldn't be solved with drills or marches. During those long, idle months in the desert, a different kind of enemy emerged: boredom. Secretary of War Newton D. Baker sent an investigator named Raymond Fosdick to assess the camps. His report was grim, describing terrible scenes of disorder, drunkenness, and sexual immorality. Alcohol and prostitution were rampant, leading to an explosion of venereal disease, a strategic threat that could cripple an entire division in the pre-antibiotic era. One of Pershing's methods of dealing with the women problem, quote unquote, was to build brothels in or near his camps. The sanitary village near one camp consisted of a restaurant and 41 room cabins where prostitutes worked and slept. In the book The General and the Jaguar, Pershing's Hunt for Pancho by Eileen Wellsome, we find this passage. Pershing approved of a similar restricted districts for the Troupe en Elve. In a letter to General Scott, he said that he saw no other way to resolve the woman question and pointed out that the arrangement had actually lowered the rate of venereal disease. Some of the medical officers, though, found the arrangement appalling. As some of the men remarked, "Whenever the wind blows, we get covered with whore dust." And while that is putting it rather vulgarly, yet it was the way we felt about it. Fosdick's report exposed the Army's critical flaw. It had a plan for fighting, but no plan for living. This realization on the Mexican border would spark an unprecedented solution, one that would forever change both the U.S. military and American culture itself. With the diagnosis clear, America's army was physically weak and morally vulnerable, the cure would not come from a general, but from a progressive Secretary of War who believed he could engineer a new kind of soldier. When the U.S. entered World War I in April 1917, Newton D. Baker faced the task of turning a small 130,000 man army into a force of millions. He saw this not just as a military problem, but as a grand social experiment. Determined to avoid the moral decay seen on the border, he established the Commission on Training Camp Activities, CTCA, just 2 weeks after war was declared, appointing Fosdick as its chairman. The commission's goal was to keep millions of U.S. soldiers physically healthy and morally pure. The Commission launched a two-pronged attack: suppress vice while providing wholesome alternatives that would serve as invisible armor against temptation. Partnering with the YMCA and other civic groups, they built hundreds of recreational facilities in camps nationwide. At its core, this was a massive public health initiative designed to fight STDs by giving young men something better to do. At the centerpiece of this entire moral and physical strategy would be athletics. Between the spring and summer of 1917, the War Department constructed 33 cantonments, or military camps, each capable of housing 40,000 soldiers across the country. Existing naval bases and military airfields also expanded rapidly to accommodate the influx of recruits. As an aside, while all of this gets painted as morality, one might stop to think that most of the mayors, store owners, and other upstanding citizens of these communities where these cantonments were built just wanted to keep these young soldiers away from their daughters. To lead this effort, the commission needed a national icon, and they found the perfect man in Walter Camp, the father of American football. By 1917, Camp was already a living legend. As a player, coach, and member of the Rules Committee, he was known as the father of American football. Camp was tasked with designing a fitness program for the entire military with a clear mission: use organized sports to eliminate vice and keep American soldiers fit to fight. But before Camp could turn soldiers into football players, he had to solve a much more basic problem. How do you get millions of men into shape with no equipment and almost no time? His solution was a stroke of genius called the Daily Dozen. It was a set of 12 simple, scientifically designed exercises that could be taught to millions. The routine required no equipment, took only 8 minutes, and was designed to be refreshing, not exhausting. It was a spectacular success, but its influence went far beyond the barracks. Camp promoted the routine in magazines, and a pamphlet sold nearly 500,000 copies. In a remarkable fusion of fitness and technology, the Daily Dozen was even released on a set of phonograph records, allowing Americans to exercise at home to rousing band music and Camp's shouted commands. It may remind many of you to that chicken fat song to which you had to do exercises years ago in the 60s and 70s. It's incredible to think that this fitness craze, which swept the nation, was born from a military report on venereal disease. If you're finding this hidden history as fascinating as I do, take a moment to hit the like button. Make sure you're just subscribed. It lets me know you enjoy these deep dives. Walter Camp's exercises only solved half the problem. They made the soldiers fit, but they didn't solve the core issue of boredom and vice. To do that, the Army would need more than just calisthenics. They needed a spectacle. They needed a war game that wasn't actually war. With Walter Camp's fitness plan in place, football became the heart of life in the training camps. It was the ultimate tool for installing teamwork, discipline, and aggression, the perfect preparation for the battlefield. A massive, highly structured sports program was rolled out. While boxing and baseball were popular, football was king. Leagues were formed at every level, from platoon rivalries to division championships. As hundreds of thousands of college men joined the ranks, they brought their football skills with them. This led to the creation of elite all-star service teams, whose rosters read like a who's who of college football. George Potsy Clark, the star quarterback from Illinois, played for Camp Funston. The Great Lakes Naval Training Station team was so stacked that future NFL Hall of Famer Jimmy Conzelman was a backup. These teams were often led by the nation's best coaches, like Georgia's William Cunningham and future legend Robert Neyland of Tennessee. These powerful service teams played against each other in top college programs, drawing huge crowds and raising millions for the war effort. The phenomenon peaked on New Year's Day 1918 when the Rose Bowl featured two service teams, the Camp Lewis Army Squad versus the Mare Island Marines. The game was a national spectacle, cementing service football as a premier athletic enterprise. And just like that, the very same problem that led to brothels and brawls in the Mexican desert was now selling out stadiums and funding the war effort. The transformation was total. All of this was happening by design. It was the ultimate solution to that moral crisis discovered on the Mexican border, replacing the temptations of the saloon with the discipline of the gridiron. This mass mobilization created a massive captive audience for the sport. Millions of young men, farmers from the Midwest, factory workers from the Northeast, were intensely exposed to high-level football for the first time. Before the war, college football was regional. The military camps erased these boundaries, blending players and styles from across the country into a standardized national game. This process expanded football's appeal beyond the college campus and into the working class, creating the shared cultural foundation a professional league would need to survive. The war had inadvertently created the perfect conditions for a viable professional football league to emerge. There was a huge pool of highly skilled veterans looking to play, a new national audience that understood the game, and most importantly, a new respect for the professional athlete. Before the war, pro football was a fringe sport with a negative connotation. Now, a man who played for money was no longer just a mechanic, he was a respected veteran. This new reality led to a meeting in a Hupmobile auto showroom in Canton, Ohio. On September 17, 1920, a group of team owners gathered to bring order to the chaotic pro game. They created the American Professional Football Association, which 2 years later would be renamed the National Football League. The league's most important pioneer was George Halas, a veteran of that powerhouse Great Lakes Naval Training Station team. Halas represented the Decatur Staleys, a company team he would soon move to Chicago and rename the Bears. He was far from the only veteran in the room. The early NFL rosters were filled with men who had played in the cantonments. According to historian Chris Serb, over 240 war football alumni, including 7 future Hall of Famers, would fill the league's rosters in its formative years. While veterans were building a pro league, an equally significant movement was transforming college football. Universities across the country sought to commemorate the students who had lost their lives in the Great War. But instead of statues or arches, they built a new kind of memorial, the football stadium. This wasn't an isolated trend. From the University of Illinois, with its 200 columns inscribed with the names of the fallen, to the University of Kansas and all the way to the West Coast at Cal Berkeley and the University of Washington, a new kind of monument was being built. These weren't statues of generals. They were cathedrals of sport, each one a living memorial to the men who didn't come home. These stadiums physically and symbolically cemented football's new status as a central part of American patriotic life. They were places where the virtues the soldiers died for, teamwork, physical courage, and sacrifice, could be celebrated by a new generation. The American football we know today, both professional and collegiate, was an unexpected consequence of a World War I government program. The war took a regional college sport, nationalized it in military training camps, and used it to solve a crisis of morale and public health. This experience directly established the two pillars of modern football: the NFL, founded and filled by veterans like George Halas, and the massive college game played in monumental stadiums built to honor the war dead. The game's very DNA was forged not just on the gridiron, but because of a national crisis, making its rise inseparable from America's entry onto the world stage. The decision to build stadiums instead of statues as war memorials was a major cultural shift. What do you think? Is a living memorial like a stadium a more fitting tribute than a traditional monument? I'm really curious to read your thoughts on this in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, you might like our playlist featuring offenses throughout football history. The playlist contains video on the single wing, the T formation, the wishbone, and the first triple option offense, the veer, amongst others. You'll also find some fun stuff such as the lonesome polecat, the forerunner of the run and shoot, and the lonesome end, a story unto itself. This is John Johnston with Hardcore College Football History. Thanks for watching. But instead of statues or archus,